My name is Clara Vance, and I am 34 years old. 2 weeks ago, my sister-in-law, Amanda, stood in the doorway of the home my husband and I spent 7 years building, holding a trash bag filled with my clothes. My husband, David, was lying in an intensive care unit 3 miles away, recovering from an unexpected, devastating brain aneurysm surgery. As I sat in the hospital parking lot, shaking, my phone buzzed with a legal notice Amanda had drafted herself. An immediate eviction from the family, a state on the grounds that I was a financial parasite who had no legal claim to the property. What Amanda didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend through her blinding greed, was that the very foundation she thought she was standing on belonged entirely to me. When David finally woke up and learned what his sister had done while he fought for his life, his recovery became fueled by a quiet, absolute rage. He didn't just ask me to come back. The moment his discharge papers were signed, he demanded Amanda be thrown out of the house, stripped of her position, and left with absolutely nothing. Before we get into the details of how a family can rot from the inside out over a piece of land, please take a moment to drop your location and local time in the comments below. I read every single one, and I want to know where you are listening from today. Now, let me take you back to where this nightmare truly began. 7 years ago, at a quiet dinner table where the cracks in the Vance family first showed themselves. To understand why Amanda thought she had the right to throw me onto the street while my husband was unconscious, you have to understand the dynamic of the Vance family. David and Amanda's parents, Arthur and Alina Vance, had established what everyone in our town called the Vance estate. It wasn't a massive mansion, but it was a beautiful, sprawling 4-acre property with an old colonial house and a smaller, detached guest house. Arthur had been a successful local contractor, and he built that house with his own hands. But when he passed away in 2014, he left the property to his wife, Alina, with the spoken understanding that it would eventually be divided between David and Amanda. I met David in 2016. At the time, I was working as a junior partner at an architectural design and historic preservation firm. I had a solid income, a passion for restoration, and a very clear understanding of property law and structural value. David was an independent structural engineer. We fell in love over blueprint discussions and shared dreams of rebuilding old spaces. When we got married in 2018, Alina invited us to live in the main house with her. The property was aging rapidly. The roof leaked, the electrical system was a fire hazard, and the foundation on the east wing was starting to settle unevenly. Alina couldn't afford the maintenance on her widow's pension, and the estate was on the verge of becoming a liability. "Clara, David," Alina had said to us over tea one Sunday afternoon, "if you two move in and use your skills to completely renovate this place, this house will be yours. Amanda has her own life in the city, but you two are the ones keeping the family legacy alive." We agreed, but because of my professional background, I insisted on a formal arrangement. We didn't want to just sink our life savings into a house we didn't legally own. Alina, being a traditional and honorable woman, signed a property management and investment agreement. It stated that every dollar David and I spent on capital improvements, structural repairs, and property taxes would be recorded as an accumulating equity stake in the estate. If the property were ever sold or divided, our investment would be paid out first, or we would retain the equivalent percentage of the actual deed. Amanda, however, saw things very differently. Amanda was 3 years older than David and worked as a high-end real estate agent in the city, or at least, that's what she told everyone. In reality, she struggled to maintain her lifestyle, constantly jumping from boutique brokerages to high-interest lines of credit to maintain the appearance of a wealthy cosmopolitan woman. To Amanda, the Vance estate wasn't a family home or a sentimental piece of her father's legacy. It was a multi-million-dollar lottery ticket waiting to be cashed. The moment David and I moved into the main house, Amanda's attitude shifted from cold indifference to active hostility. She would visit on holidays, walking through the rooms we were meticulously restoring, looking at the premium hardwood floors and the custom kitchen cabinetry we paid for out of pocket. "Must be nice to live rent-free in our family's house," she would comment casually at dinner, swirling her wine. I'm glad my brother found a wife who knows how to exploit an old woman's generosity. David would always defend me, his voice tight. Amanda, Clara is putting 40% of her salary into this foundation. We pay the property taxes. We paid off Mom's outstanding medical bills last year. We aren't living here for free. We are keeping this place from collapsing. Amanda would just laugh, a sharp, dismissive sound. Whatever you need to tell yourselves, little brother, but remember, half of this dirt belongs to me. Dad wanted it that way. For 5 years, we tolerated her snide remarks, her unannounced visits where she would treat the estate like a weekend resort, and her constant attempts to pressure Alina into selling the back 2 acres of the land to developers. Alina always refused, anchored by David's presence and the stability we provided. Then, in late 2023, Alina passed away peacefully in her sleep. The grief was overwhelming for David. He had lost his anchor. But before the soil on Alina's grave was even settled, Amanda arrived at the house with a laptop, a folder full of market assessments, and an aggressive, frantic energy. Alina, will was simple. The estate was left to David and Amanda as co-executors, to be shared equally. Amanda assumed this meant a 50-50 split of the current market value, completely ignoring or completely ignorant of the legally binding investment agreement Alina had signed with us years prior. We need to list the property immediately, Amanda declared at the kitchen table, the exact same table where Alina had promised us the home. The market is peaking. We can get $1.8 million for the entire 4 acres. We split it, $900K each, and we walk away. David looked at her, his eyes red from crying. Amanda, we live here. This is our home. We've spent 5 years sweating over this wood, fixing the plumbing, making it safe. We aren't selling. You don't have a choice, David, Amanda snapped, her professional facade dropping instantly. I am a 50% owner of this property. I can file a partition lawsuit and force a judicial sale. You cannot afford to buy out my half for $900,000, so let's skip the drama and hire a photographer. I stepped in, keeping my voice entirely calm, relying on my training. Amanda, you're missing a critical piece of the math. Over the last 5 years, David and I have invested over $450,000 into structural stabilization, a new roof, historical tax compliance, and clearing the liens your mother had on the property. Per the signed agreement with Alina, that money is an absolute claim against the value of the estate before any division occurs. If the house sells for $1.8 million, the first $450,000 comes directly to us. The remaining $1.35 million is split 50-50. Your share wouldn't be $900,000. It would be $675,000. And if David and I choose to buy you out, we only owe you $675,000, which we can comfortably secure through a refinancing mortgage based on the new equity. Amanda's face turned an ugly, mottled red. She slammed her laptop shut. That piece of paper is worthless. Mom was old and manipulated by a greedy outsider who married into this family for land. I will tie you up in court for years before I let you steal my inheritance. She stormed out, tires screeching down the gravel driveway. For the next few months, it was quiet. We checked the mail daily, expecting a legal notice, but nothing arrived. We assumed her lawyers had told her the truth. Our contract was airtight, registered properly, and fully backed by financial bank statements matching every single invoice. But Amanda wasn't preparing a legal battle. She was waiting for a vulnerability, and that vulnerability came on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. David was working in the garage, reviewing blueprints for a commercial project, when I heard a heavy, sickening thud. I ran out to find him collapsed on the concrete floor, his eyes rolled back, his body seizing violently. My heart stopped. I called 911, screaming into the receiver, my hands slick with his sweat as I tried to keep his airway clear. At the hospital, the neurosurgeon delivered the terrifying diagnosis, a ruptured cerebral aneurysm. David was rushed into emergency surgery. The survival rate was low, and the risk of severe neurological damage was high. I spent 48 hours sitting in the surgical waiting room, living on stale coffee and pure terror, praying for my husband to open his eyes. I called Amanda immediately after the admission. She didn't answer. I texted her. David is in the ICU. Brain surgery. It's critical. Please come. She didn't show up that night. She didn't show up the next day. Instead, on the third morning, while David was still heavily sedated and breathing through a ventilator, I drove back to the estate for a quick shower and a change of clothes. My body was aching, my mind completely numb from exhaustion. As I pulled up the gravel driveway, I noticed something strange. A large white box truck was parked near the side entrance. The front door of my house was wide open. I hurried inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Hello, is someone here?" I walked into the living room and froze. Amanda was standing there, directed by two men in gray moving uniforms. Our custom bookshelf had been stripped. My grandfather's antique clock was sitting on the floor near the door. Amanda was holding a clipboard, checking off items. "Amanda," I whispered, my voice cracked. What? What are you doing? David is still in a coma. What is this?" Amanda turned around. There was no sympathy in her eyes, no grief for her brother. There was only a cold, calculated, terrifying smirk. "Oh, Clara," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I'm just taking possession of my family property. And since my brother is incapacitated and likely won't ever be the same, if he even makes it out of that room, your little tenancy here is officially over." "What are you talking about?" I stepped forward, my hands clenching into fists. "Get these people out of my house right now." "It's not your house," Amanda said, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. She stepped close to me, holding up a document. "As co-executor of the Vance estate, and with the primary resident currently unable to manage his affairs, I have assumed full operational control of the property. I've filed an emergency petition stating that you are occupying the premises illegally and destroying family assets. You have exactly 20 minutes to take what fits in your car and leave, or these gentlemen will assist me in removing you for trespassing." "You're insane," I gasped, tears finally spilling over my eyelids. "David is dying in a hospital bed and you're doing this. The agreement." "The agreement was with a leaner who is dead," Amanda cut me off, her eyes gleaming with malice. "And David isn't here to protect you anymore, Clara. You're nothing to this family. You're an interloper. Now take your trash and get out of my father's house." One of the large movers stepped between us, looking uncomfortable but clearly following her orders. Amanda tossed a black, heavy-duty trash bag at my feet. Inside were a few random sweaters pulled from my closet and my bathroom toiletries, thrown together carelessly. I looked at the house we had poured our souls into. I looked at Amanda, who was already instructing the movers to pack up our television. I realized with a sudden, chilling clarity that arguing with her here, alone, while my husband's life hung in the balance, was a losing battle. My priority had to be David. I picked up my purse, grabbed the trash bag, and looked Amanda dead in the eyes. "You think you've won because he can't speak right now," I said, my voice completely steady despite the tears streaming down my face. "But he will wake up. And when he does, Amanda, you will realize this is the biggest mistake of your miserable life." She just laughed and waved her hand, dismissing me like an annoying insect. I drove back to the hospital, parking my car in the dark corner of the lot. I sat in the driver's seat, clutching the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, letting the tears fall until I had nothing left inside me. That was when my phone chimed. It was an email from a legal courier service, an immediate eviction notice, and an injunction preventing me from entering the property boundaries of the Vance estate, effective immediately. I was homeless. My husband was hovering between life and death, and his sister was currently sleeping in our bed. I walked back into the ICU, sat down by David's bedside, and took his cold, limp hand in mine. For 3 days, I didn't leave that room. I slept in the hard vinyl chair, watching the monitors beep, praying for a sign. On the 4th day after the eviction, David's fingers twitched against mine. His eyelids fluttered, squinting against the harsh hospital fluorescent lights. He looked at me, his voice a barely audible rasp through his dry throat. "Clara," he whispered. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here," I sobbed, leaning over him. He looked around the room, confused, weak, but his eyes were completely clear. The surgery had worked. His cognitive functions were intact. He was alive. As the doctors checked his vitals and expressed their absolute amazement at his recovery, David kept his eyes fixed on me. He noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the same clothes I had been wearing for days, and the deep, heavy exhaustion radiating from my posture. Once the medical staff left us alone, he reached out and touched my cheek. "You look exhausted, Clara. Go home. Go get some rest in our bed. I'm okay now." I bit my lip, trying to hold back the fresh wave of emotion, but the dam broke. I collapsed against the edge of his mattress, my shoulders shaking. "What's wrong?" David asked, panic instantly entering his weak voice. "Clara, what happened? Is it the house? Did something happen to the house?" I looked up at him, knowing I couldn't hide the truth from him anymore. He needed to know what his sister had done while he was fighting for his breath. "David," I whispered, squeezing his hand. "Amanda threw me out." David's face drained of what little color it had regained since his surgery. The monitors monitoring his heart rate began to pace upward, emitting a series of rapid, high-pitched beeps that brought a nurse rushing into the room. She checked the lines, looking at me with a stern warning to keep the patient calm, but David pushed her hand away gently, his eyes locked onto mine with a terrifying intensity. "What do you mean she threw you out, Clara?" His voice was strained, hoarse from the ventilator tubes that had only just been removed. "Explain it to me, exactly what happened." I took a deep breath, smoothing the blanket over his legs to soothe him, and told him everything. I told him about arriving at the estate to find the moving truck, about Amanda standing in our living room checking off our belongings on a clipboard, about the black trash bag she had tossed at my feet, and finally, about the emergency legal eviction notice that now sat in my email inbox, threatening me with criminal trespassing if I set foot on the property. As I spoke, David didn't interrupt. His jaw clenched so tightly I feared he might crack a tooth. The rage radiating from him was absolute, a silent, burning fire that seemed to give him a sudden, unnatural surge of physical strength. When I finished, he reached out, pulled his hand from the IV lines slightly, and gripped my wrist. "Call my lawyer, Arthur Pendleton," David whispered, his voice trembling with a fury I had never heard in the 10 years we had been together. "And Clara, do not answer any calls from Amanda. Let her think she won. Let her think she has completely taken over the estate, because the higher she climbs right now, the harder she is going to hit the ground." The next few days were a blur of intense medical evaluations and quiet legal strategy. While Amanda was busy settling into our home, taking photos of the beautifully renovated spaces to post on her real estate social media pages as if she had curated them herself, Arthur Pendleton was working quietly in the background. Arthur had been a close friend of David's father and knew the exact history of the Vance estate. When I sent him the property investment agreement signed by a liener, along with 5 years of bank statements, contractor invoices, and tax receipts, he let out a low whistle over the phone. "Clara, this isn't just an investment agreement," Arthur told me, his voice sharp and confident. "This is a recorded equitable lien against the title of the property. By filing an emergency eviction under the guise of an executive decision without consulting the co-executor, David, and by using his medical incapacitation to freeze you out, Amanda has committed a massive breach of her fiduciary duty as an executor. She didn't just break a family promise. She broke probate and property law in 3 distinct ways. We can file for an immediate injunction to restore your possession, but David wants to wait until his discharge. He wants to deliver this sequence personally." On the 6th day, David was moved from the ICU to a regular recovery wing. His physical therapy progressed at an astonishing pace. The doctors were baffled by his determination, but I knew what was driving him. Every time he took a painful step down the hospital corridor, balancing against a walker, he wasn't thinking about his health. He was thinking about the woman who had treated his wife like garbage while he lay unconscious. Meanwhile, Amanda finally realized she needed to maintain appearances. She sent me a text message on the 8th day. It was cold, clinical, and completely devoid of human empathy. "Clara, I hope David is doing better. Regarding the house, I am currently preparing the property for a premium market listing. I am willing to offer you a flat settlement of $50,000 for the work you did on the kitchen, provided you sign a full waiver releasing all claims to the Vance estate and agree not to contact me further. If you do not accept this by Friday, I will proceed with the partition sale and you will receive nothing. Let me know." I showed the message to David. He looked at it, a cold, dark smile spreading across his face. "Don't reply," he said softly. "Friday is the day I get discharged. We're going to give her our answer in person." When Friday morning arrived, the neurologist signed David's discharge papers. He was still weak, requiring a cane to walk, but his mind was sharp, focused, and entirely lethal. Arthur Pendleton met us in the hospital lobby, carrying a thick leather briefcase stuffed with certified court filings, an emergency stay of eviction, and a formal petition to strip Amanda of her co-executorship due to financial misconduct and self-dealing. "Are you ready for this, David?" Arthur asked, adjusting his glasses. "Once we serve these papers and enter that house, the bridge is burned. There is no going back to normal family holidays." David looked at his cane, then up at the hospital doors leading out into the bright autumn sunshine. "Arthur, my sister burned that bridge the moment she handed my wife a trash bag while I was breathing through a machine. Let's go home." We drove toward the estate in silence. The closer we got, the more my chest tightened with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. When we turned down the long gravel driveway, my heart dropped. Amanda's luxury European SUV was parked in front of the main entrance. Next to it was a large, brightly colored lawn sign that read, "Coming soon, exclusive historic estate. Contact Amanda Vance Realty." She hadn't even waited for David to leave the hospital before putting her name on the front lawn. David stared at the sign as I parked the car. His hands gripped the handle of his cane so hard his skin turned completely white. "Clara, stay close to me. Arthur, let's go." We walked up the front steps. I unlocked the door using my spare key. Amanda hadn't managed to change the deadbolts yet, likely assuming I wouldn't dare violate the legal notice she had emailed me. The heavy oak door swung open, and the scent of fresh lavender and expensive staging candles hit my nose. Amanda had completely redecorated. Our family photos had been taken down from the mantelpiece and replaced with modern, abstract art pieces designed to appeal to wealthy buyers. From the kitchen, we heard the sound of laughter and a wine cork popping. Amanda was standing by the marble island we had installed, raised glass in hand, talking to a man holding a professional camera equipment bag. She was in the middle of describing how she planned to market the classic charm of the space when she heard our footsteps and turned around. The smile froze on her face. Her eyes darted from me to the cane in David's hand and finally to Arthur Pendleton, who was already pulling a massive stack of documents from his briefcase. "David," Amanda gasped, her voice dropping an octave, losing its confident professional sheen. "What? What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in rehab. The doctors said you'd be bedridden for weeks." "You sound disappointed, Amanda," David said, his voice terrifyingly calm as he leaned heavily on his cane, taking a slow step into the kitchen. "Were you hoping the aneurysm would finish the job so you wouldn't have to share the deed at all?" "Don't be ridiculous," Amanda stammered, her eyes shifting nervously toward the photographer who was awkwardly trying to step backward out of the room. I was preparing the asset. You know we need to sell this place. Clara was refusing to cooperate, and with you sick, someone had to take charge of the estate's finances. I did this for us, David." "For us," David chuckled, a dry, bitter sound that echoed off the high ceilings we had spent months painting. "You threw my wife out of her own home. You handed her a trash bag of clothes while I was unconscious in an ICU bed. You told her she was nothing to this family." "She isn't family," Amanda snapped, her panic turning into familiar defensive aggression. She slammed her wine glass down onto the counter. "She's an outsider who manipulated Mom into signing a fake contract. This is Dad's land, David. It belongs to the Vance bloodline, not some gold-digging architect. I have an eviction notice against her. Clara, you are violating a legal order by being here right now. Leave before I call the police." Arthur Pendleton stepped forward, placing a certified, court-stamped document directly onto the marble counter, sliding it right over Amanda's clipboard. Actually, Amanda, you won't be calling anyone, Arthur said calmly. My name is Arthur Pendleton, representing David and Clara Vance. What you are looking at is an emergency ex-parte injunction signed by a Superior Court judge at 8:30 this morning. It completely invalidates your fraudulent eviction notice, restores Clara's full possession of the property, and places an immediate freeze on your administrative powers as co-executor. Amanda stared at the paper, her breath catching in her throat. This is garbage. I am the executor, Momswell says. Momswell states you are co-executors, requiring joint agreement for all major property decisions, David interrupted, his voice dropping into a harsh, unyielding register. You acted alone. You used my medical emergency to commit fraud. And because of that, Arthur has already filed a petition to have you completely removed from the executorship due to a gross breach of fiduciary duty, self-dealing, and elder exploitation. You can't prove any of that, Amanda screamed, her face turning that same ugly red I had seen months ago. We already proved it to the judge. I stepped forward, looking her dead in the eyes, feeling the weight of the last 2 weeks finally lifting off my shoulders. We submitted every bank statement showing that David and I paid the property taxes, the structural insurance, and the maintenance that kept this house from being condemned while you were living in your rented luxury apartment in the city. Your little real estate sign on our front lawn. That's prime evidence of unauthorized self-dealing. Amanda looked at the photographer, who had completely checked out of the conversation and was actively packing his lenses into his backpack. "Mark, wait outside," she whispered, her voice shaking. Once the front door closed behind the photographer, the silence in the kitchen became suffocating. Amanda looked at her brother, realizing for the first time that her gamble had failed completely. The weak, compliant little brother she thought she could bully had returned from the brink of death, and he wasn't looking for a compromise. "David, please." Amanda changed her tone instantly, her voice cracking with forced emotion as she tried to step toward him. "We're siblings. Dad wouldn't want us fighting like this over money. I was stressed. I thought you weren't going to make it, and I panicked about the expenses. Let's talk about this like family." David looked around the kitchen, his eyes landing on the abstract art pieces she had used to replace our memories. He looked back at his sister, his expression completely blank, devoid of any familial warmth. "You're right, Amanda. Dad wouldn't want us fighting over this house," David said softly. "Which is why you're going to get out of it, right now." "What?" Amanda gasped. "You have 20 minutes. David echoed the exact words she had weaponized against me days prior. "Take whatever fits in your SUV and leave. If you are still on this property in 21 minutes, Arthur has a sheriff's deputy waiting down the road to remove you for unlawful entry and property destruction." Amanda stood frozen, looking at the stack of legal documents, realizing she was completely trapped. But as she gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, a dark, vindictive look crossed her features. She looked at me, then back at David, and let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. "You think you've won because you have a fancy lawyer?" Amanda sneered, leaning over the counter. "You think you can just kick me out and live happily ever after in this old dump? You forget one thing, David. I still own 50% of the underlying deed of this entire 4-acre lot. You cannot remove me from the title without a full buyout. And unless you have $1 million sitting in cash under your mattress, you can't buy me out. I will refuse every offer. I will block every permit. I will turn your life into a living hell until this house rots from the inside out. You haven't seen anything yet." She grabbed her designer purse, slammed her laptop into her bag, and marched toward the front door, her heels clicking loudly against the hardwood. As she passed David, she didn't look at him, but she left the front door wide open as she stormed out into the afternoon air. Arthur Pendleton looked at David, then at me, a calm, steady expression on his face. "She's right about the deed, David. To fully secure this property and protect Clara permanently, we have to liquidate her share of the title. If she refuses to cooperate, a standard partition lawsuit could take 2 to 3 years of expensive litigation." David leaned heavily on his cane, walking over to the kitchen window. He watched Amanda throw her staging boxes into the back of her SUV, her movements frantic and furious. "She thinks she knows the math of this property because she sells houses for a living," David said, his voice dropping into a low, rumbling whisper that made my hair stand on end. But she doesn't know anything about structural realities. Arthur, open the second folder from the briefcase, the one from the city planning board that arrived yesterday morning. Arthur pulled out a bright blue document stamped with an official city seal. I walked over to the counter, looking at the technical drawings and land assessments attached to the front page. "What is this, David?" I asked, looking at the intricate red lines running directly through the back 2 acres of our property. David turned away from the window, his eyes burning with a dangerous, brilliant intensity. When Amanda tried to force Mom to sell the back lot to developers last year, she didn't realize the city was already conducting an environmental and utility easement study. The entire eastern border of our land sits directly on a critical watershed runoff zone. 2 days ago, while I was in the recovery wing, the city council officially approved an infrastructure layout. They are rezoning the back half of this estate as a non-developable municipal easement. The market value of her half didn't just drop, Clara, it evaporated. David looked at the door where his sister had just departed. She wants to fight dirty over the deed. Fine. By the time we are done with the valuation in court next week, Amanda isn't going to get $1 million. She's going to find out she owes us more in historical remediation costs than her share of this dirt is even worth. The revelation of the city council's rezoning project hung in the quiet living room like a heavy weight. I looked at the blue technical documents spread across our marble island, tracing the bright red lines that slashed directly through the 4-acre parcel. Amanda had spent years looking at this land through a lens of absolute entitlement, calculating her imaginary millions based on outdated market trends. She completely failed to check the municipal registry, entirely blinded by her eagerness to capitalize on my husband's medical crisis. "David," I murmured, studying the watershed runoff map carefully. "If the city has officially designated the back 2 acres as a non-developable municipal easement, what does that mean for the total financial valuation of her half of the deed?" Arthur Pendleton adjusted his glasses, a slow, clinical smile forming on his face. "It means, Clara, that the land Amanda was planning to sell to commercial luxury developers is now legally classified as protected wetlands. You cannot build a house on it. You cannot lay a concrete foundation. You cannot cut down the old trees. Its commercial market value has plummeted from an estimated $900,000 to practically nothing. In fact, because the easement requires a mandatory public drainage access point, whoever owns that portion of the title is legally liable for maintaining the municipal silt barriers and paying structural remediation taxes." David walked over, leaning heavily on his cane, his eyes fixed on the map. The pale exhaustion from his brain surgery was still visible in the tight lines around his mouth, but the sharp, brilliant engineer inside him was fully awake. "Amanda wanted to use a partition lawsuit to force a judicial sale of this entire estate," David explained, his voice low and steady. "She assumed a judge would just order the property sold at an open auction, forcing us out so she could split the cash. But under state law, when an inherited property is structurally asymmetrical, meaning one sibling has invested extensive capital into the primary residence while the other has contributed absolutely zero, the court orders an independent referee valuation. Next Tuesday, the court-appointed appraiser arrives. When they see this city easement file, the math changes completely." "She thinks she's holding a winning lottery ticket," I said, a sense of quiet justice settling into my chest. "But she's actually holding a massive, expensive structural liability." "Exactly," David nodded, his jaw tightening. "We aren't going to hide this from her. We are going to let her lawyer discover it during the mandatory disclosure exchange tomorrow morning. I want her to see the exact moment her entire financial house of cards collapses." The next few days passed with a quiet, methodical rhythm. I spent my mornings helping David with his physical therapy exercises on the back porch, watching him regain his balance and stride. Every step he took without his cane felt like a small victory over the nightmare we had just survived. We spent our afternoons restoring our home to its original state. I took down Amanda's sterile, abstract staging art and carefully rehung our family photographs on the living room mantel. I brought back the warm, familiar blankets, wiped away the synthetic lavender candles she had burned, and allowed the natural scent of old oak and fresh timber to fill the rooms once again. While we were healing our home, Amanda's life was completely unraveling 3 miles away. On Thursday afternoon, Arthur Pendleton called us with an update. Amanda's real estate attorney had received our formal disclosure packet, which included the certified city council infrastructure maps, the signed equity agreement with a liener, and our verified bank ledgers. Her lawyer requested an emergency settlement conference for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, Arthur told us, his tone deeply satisfied. Apparently, when Amanda saw the municipal easement filing, she had a complete meltdown in his office. Her attorney told her straight out that if she proceeds with a partition lawsuit now, the court will award her virtually nothing for the land, while forcing her to pay half of your 5-year maintenance expenses out of pocket. She is completely backed into a corner. "We will meet them," David said firmly. "But we aren't going to his office. Tell them to come here. I want this settled at the exact table where she tried to hand my wife a black trash bag." Friday morning arrived, crisp and cold. David and I sat side by side at our large wooden kitchen table, the sun pouring through the custom windows we had installed with our own hands. Arthur Pendleton sat next to us, his leather briefcase open, documents neatly organized in front of him. At exactly 9 o'clock, the gravel driveway crunched. A modest sedan pulled up, and Amanda stepped out, followed by a tired-looking man in a dark gray suit. Amanda looked entirely different from the confident, aggressive woman who had stormed out of our house a week ago. Her designer sunglasses couldn't hide the dark, heavy circles under her eyes, her posture was slumped, and the frantic, manic energy had been replaced by a bitter, hollow defeat. They walked into the kitchen. Amanda didn't look at me. She kept her eyes fixed firmly on the floor as her attorney, a man named Mr. Vance's representative, shook hands with Arthur Pendleton. "Thank you for meeting us here, Pendleton," the attorney said, sitting down and opening his folder. "Let's skip the preamble. My client has reviewed the municipal easement documents and the historical capital investment agreements signed by the late Clara Vance. We recognize that a protracted legal battle will not benefit either party. We are here to negotiate a clean buyout of Amanda's 50% share of the deed." David leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table. "We aren't negotiating, Mr. Miller. The time for negotiation ended when my sister filed a fraudulent eviction notice against my wife while I was breathing through a machine in the intensive care unit." Amanda's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with a final, desperate spark of anger. "David, I am your sister. You can't just strip me of my inheritance. Dad built this place. Half of it is legally mine." "Dad built this place to be a home, Amanda, not an asset for you to liquidate to pay off your credit card debts," David said, his voice entirely calm, entirely devoid of anger, which made it hit twice as hard. "You abandoned this house for years. You didn't pay a single dollar toward the property taxes. You didn't help Mom when she was sick. And the absolute second you thought I was going to die, you came here with a moving truck to rob my wife of her safety. You aren't family anymore. You're just a title holder. We are clearing off our ledger." Arthur Pendleton slid a single, crisp document across the table toward Amanda's attorney. "This is our final, non-negotiable buyout offer," Arthur stated coldly. "Based on the certified appraisal factoring in the new municipal easement, the back 2 acres are valued at exactly $18,000 due to environmental restrictions. The primary residence and the surrounding 2 acres are valued at $750,000. However, per the equitable lien, David and Clara's pre-existing investment claim of $450,000 must be deducted first. That leaves a remaining equity value of $300,000, split 50-50 between the heirs." Mr. Miller looked at the numbers, checking them against his own calculator, and gave a slow, reluctant nod. $150,000 for her share of the main property, plus $9,000 for her share of the back lot. Total buyout of $159,000. "Wait, what?" Amanda gasped, leaning over her lawyer's shoulder, her face turning incredibly pale. $159,000? That's impossible. This whole estate is worth nearly $2 million. I am supposed to get $900,000. You're cheating me." "No, Amanda, you cheated yourself," I said, speaking up for the first time, keeping my voice soft and measured. "If you had come to us like a sister when Alina passed, we would have worked out a fair, long-term arrangement. We would have helped you. But you wanted everything. You wanted to leave me with a single trash bag in a hospital parking lot. The market value of this property didn't change. Your ability to exploit our labor did." "Mr. Miller, tell them no," Amanda cried, her voice cracking as she grabbed her lawyer's arm. "We will take it to court. A judge won't let them do this to me." Mr. Miller looked at his client with a mixture of pity and professional exhaustion. "Amanda, if we go to court, the partition suit will take 2 years. You will have to pay my hourly fees out of pocket, which will easily exceed $60,000. Furthermore, David's team will file a countersuit for financial elder abuse and breach of fiduciary duty based on your unauthorized actions as executor. If a judge finds you liable for self-dealing, you could be stripped of your entire inheritance completely and forced to pay their legal fees. This offer is the absolute maximum cash you will ever see from this property. Sign the deed." Amanda froze. The reality of her situation finally settled into her chest like a physical blow. She looked at the signature line on the quitclaim deed, then looked at David, her eyes filling with tears of pure, desperate regret. "David, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't do this to me. I'm in trouble. My brokerage is failing. I owe people money. $150,000 won't even cover my debts in the city. Please just give me a little more, for Dad's sake." David looked at his sister for a long, silent moment. I could see the faint memory of their childhood passing behind his eyes, the soft, decent part of him wrestling with the reality of what she had become. But then his eyes dropped to my hands, remembering the bruises from the hospital chairs, remembering the terror I had faced alone in this kitchen. "If you had asked for help, Amanda, I would have given it to you," David said softly, his voice heavy with finality. "But you didn't ask. You tried to destroy my family while I was helpless. Sign the papers, take your money, and never call this house again." With trembling hands, Amanda picked up the pen. She scribbled her name on the dotted line, her tears smudging the blue ink. Mr. Miller immediately stamped the document as a notary witness, gathered his papers, and stood up. "The funds will be wired to your escrow account by noon tomorrow, Mr. Miller," Arthur Pendleton said, rising to close his briefcase. "Thank you for your time." Amanda stood up slowly, her designer purse clutched against her chest like a shield. She looked around the kitchen one last time, realizing that she was no longer a part of this legacy, that her greed had completely closed the door to the only real stability she had left in the world. She turned and walked out the door, her head down, disappearing into the cold autumn air. When the sound of her car faded down the gravel driveway, a profound, beautiful silence settled over our home. The weight that had hung over our lives for 5 years was entirely gone. The estate was fully, legally, and permanently ours. David turned to me, reaching out to take my hands in his. His grip was warm, solid, and completely steady. He looked at me with a soft, bright smile that made all the exhaustion of the last 2 weeks completely vanish. "We did it, Clara," he whispered, leaning forward to press his forehead against mine. "It's ours. No more threats, no more family drama, just us." "Just us," I smiled, letting out a long, deep breath I felt like I had been holding since the morning he collapsed in the garage. We had built this house from crumbling foundations, sweating over every piece of wood and structural beam. We had fought through an unexpected medical tragedy that nearly took his life, and we had stood strong against the darkest kind of family betrayal. But as I looked out the kitchen window at the beautiful, sprawling land surrounding our home, I knew that the foundation we had built between us was completely unshakable. Now I have a very important question for you. If you were in David's shoes, would you have given your sister a second chance for the sake of your parents' memory? Or would you have cut her out completely just like he did? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and your perspectives mean the world to me. If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting that share button. Sometimes, people need to hear that it is absolutely okay to protect your peace and draw a hard line against toxic family members. Thank you so much for listening today. Stay safe, and I will see you in the next story.